The studio lights burned bright, the cameras rolled, and the crowd hushed as Denzel Washington leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Senator John Kennedy. There was no warm-up, no polite dance around the issues, he went straight for the jugular. "You serve Trump, not America," Denzel declared, his voice sharp as glass, cutting through the room like a blade. The audience gasped, some clapped instinctively, while others froze, not believing what they had just heard live on national television. Kennedy blinked, his lips tightening, but no words came. His practiced political charm seemed to evaporate under the weight of Denzel's stare. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable, until the crowd itself broke it with nervous laughter and scattered applause. It was as if everyone realized at once that Kennedy had been stripped of his usual shield, his endless talking points and well-rehearsed soundbites. "You think loyalty to one man is loyalty to a country?" Denzel continued, refusing to give Kennedy room to recover. "That's not patriotism, that's servitude. And the people watching right now know the difference." The audience erupted, stomping feet and clapping, the energy turning electric. Viewers at home could feel it too, the weight of truth colliding with power, live, raw, and unfiltered. Kennedy finally leaned into his microphone, his southern drawl wavering as he tried to reclaim control. "Now, Mr. Washington, you may be an actor, but this is politics. You don't understand the complexities of governance." His voice cracked at the edges, betraying his nerves. Denzel didn't flinch. "No, Senator. What I understand is courage. And I don't see it in you." The crowd roared so loudly the moderator had to signal for quiet. In that instant it was clear, Kennedy had walked into a battle of words unarmed, while Denzel brought fire, conviction, and an audience hungry for truth. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, fumbling with his notes as if a sheet of paper could shield him from the storm Denzel had unleashed. His face reddened under the glare of the studio lights, and beads of sweat gathered on his forehead. He leaned toward the microphone again, this time trying to deflect. "You talk about courage, Mr. Washington, but courage is sitting in this chamber day after day making the tough calls. Courage is protecting America's interests." Denzel leaned back, crossing his arms with an almost calm expression that only intensified the tension. "Protecting America's interests," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Tell me, Senator, how is serving Trump's personal agenda protecting America? How is turning your back on your own people courage?" His voice grew stronger with each word, echoing across the studio. The audience went wild, clapping, cheering, and chanting Denzel's name like it was a rally. Kennedy tried to interject, but Denzel cut him off, his timing precise, his words like thunder. "Courage isn't hiding behind power. Courage is standing up when it costs you something. And right now, all I see is a man who sold his spine for political favor." The camera zoomed in on Kennedy's face, catching the flash of panic in his eyes. The moderator, clearly overwhelmed, tried to redirect, but the energy in the room had already tipped. This wasn't a debate anymore, it was an indictment. Denzel had tapped into something raw, something the audience could feel in their bones. Kennedy stammered, You don't know what it takes to sit in this seat." His voice cracked, and the crowd immediately pounced with boos and laughter. For the first time, the senator looked cornered, stripped of his usual weapons. Denzel leaned forward again, calm yet commanding. "No, Senator. I may not sit in your seat, but I've earned mine. And unlike you, I don't use it to bow to a man. I use it to speak for a people." The studio shook with applause so deafening that Kennedy sat back, utterly speechless. The studio lights bore down like a spotlight on Kennedy, and the silence after Denzel's words felt heavier than any accusation. Kennedy gripped the edges of the desk in front of him, knuckles widening, trying to muster some strength. You sit there and preach, Mr. Washington," he stammered, "but you don't understand the weight of leadership. You don't carry the responsibility I do." Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Kennedy with an intensity that made even the moderator glance nervously between them. Leadership? Denzel's voice rose, sharp and cutting. Leadership is not being a servant to Trump's tantrums. Leadership is not bending this country's backbone just so you can keep your seat warm. What you call responsibility, Senator, the rest of America calls betrayal. The audience gasped, a wave of murmurs breaking into loud applause. Kennedy's face turned crimson, his lips twitching as though words were on the edge of spilling, but nothing coherent came out. He raised a shaky finger at Denzel. You're twisting this. You're making me into a villain. Denzel stood abruptly, his presence towering over the table. The cameras followed him, the crowd now leaning forward in their chairs. I don't have to make you into anything, he declared, voice steady and booming. Your actions did that for you. You chose to put a man above a nation. You chose silence when truth demanded a voice. You chose loyalty to Trump over loyalty to America. And that, Senator, is the definition of cowardice. The crowd erupted again, cheers, whistles, clapping that rattled the walls. Kennedy looked cornered, his chest rising and falling faster, sweat dripping from his temple. He opened his mouth to reply but closed it again, unable to form a sentence. Every camera angle captured the moment, Kennedy, speechless, and Denzel, commanding the stage. The moderator tried to interject, but the energy had already spiraled. Denzel turned toward the audience, spreading his hands. This is what happens when we put politicians in power who serve a man instead of a people. America deserves better. And it starts with telling the truth, even when it hurts. The crowd roared so loudly it nearly drowned out the broadcast feed, the noise a verdict louder than any judge could deliver. Kennedy, slumped back in his chair, had nothing left but silence. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands fumbling with the papers in front of him as if the right page could save him. The camera zoomed in close, catching every twitch of his lips, every bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. He tried to clear his throat, but the sound only echoed his weakness. Denzel remained standing, eyes locked on Kennedy, arms folded like a judge waiting for the guilty to confess. Look at you, Denzel said, his voice calm yet cutting. A senator of the United States, reduced to silence because the truth feels heavier than the lies you've been carrying. You didn't come here to serve the people. You came here to protect Trump's shadow. The audience broke into applause again, and the sound shook Kennedy even further. He tried to speak, his voice cracking as he finally managed, You don't know what it's like, Washington. You don't sit in the chamber, you don't have the power we do. Denzel leaned closer, his voice dropping into a steady growl that made the entire room freeze. Power? Power means nothing when it's abused. Power without principle is just corruption dressed in a suit. And you've worn that suit for too long, Senator. The moderator raised a hand, attempting to ease the tension, but Denzel didn't stop. His words thundered through the studio. You betrayed America when you defended lies. You betrayed America when you stayed silent as Trump tore through our institutions. And you betrayed America when you chose self-preservation over the Constitution. Kennedy's face tightened, his jaw trembling as if he might cry or explode. But still, no words came strong enough to defend him. He glanced toward the audience, searching for a hint of support, but was met only with the cold stare of people who had already made their judgment. Denzel straightened, his voice now like a hammer striking steel. America doesn't need senators who kneel to a man. America needs senators who kneel to the truth. And you, Kennedy, you've proven you're not worthy of the title. The room erupted in shouts and cheers. Viewers at home flooded social media, clips of Kennedy's stammering already trending. Hashtags blazed across screens, hashtag Coward Kennedy and hashtag Denzel Speaks Truth. The narrative had shifted in real time, and Kennedy was trapped in it, unable to claw his way out. The shot ended with Denzel standing tall, Kennedy slumped like a man exposed, and the audience chanting in unison, Truth! Truth! Truth. Kennedy's lips parted as though he might finally deliver a defense, but nothing came. The cameras caught his silence, and it spread across millions of living rooms like wildfire. Denzel stepped forward slowly, deliberately, his footsteps echoing against the studio floor like the beat of a war drum. The audience hushed, sensing something powerful was about to strike. "You want to know what this looks like?" Denzel asked, his finger pointing straight at Kennedy. "It looks like a man who has forgotten what oath he swore. You swore to defend the Constitution, not to babysit Trump's ego. You swore to protect America, not to auction her off piece by piece to the highest bidder." His words cut through the air like blades. Kennedy shifted again, sweat gleaming under the hot studio lights. "That's not fair," he stammered, but his voice cracked, sounding more like a plea than an argument. "Fair?" Denzel's voice thundered, shaking the room. "Was it fair when you stood by as lies polluted our democracy? Was it fair when you cheered while families lost hope, while the working class was left to drown? Don't talk to me about fair. Talk to me about courage, something you clearly lost when you chose Trump over truth." The crowd erupted, some rising to their feet, clapping and shouting in agreement. Kennedy glanced toward the moderator for rescue, but even the moderator's lips were pressed into a thin, uneasy line. There would be no saving grace tonight. Denzel leaned forward, his voice dropping low but sharp enough to pierce steel. "You've traded your honor for proximity to power. And power built on lies will collapse, Senator. Just like Trump's empire. And when it does, history won't remember you as a leader, it'll remember you as a servant." Kennedy lowered his eyes, unable to meet the piercing gaze locked on him. The audience roared again, hashtags exploding across Twitter, hashtag Servant Kennedy, hashtag Truth versus Power, and hashtag Denzel Unleashed. As the camera panned out, the contrast was undeniable, Denzel standing tall, unflinching, radiating conviction, Kennedy small, cornered, diminished in the very seat that once symbolized authority. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in that room felt it. The moderator finally tried to interject, his voice trembling, "Senator Kennedy, do you care to respond?" But Kennedy's hesitation had already spoken louder than any prepared statement ever could. The silence hung heavy, a silence that felt like guilt carved into the air. Denzel didn't give him the chance to recover. He raised his hand slightly, steady and commanding, and the room fell quiet again. "You've had years to respond, Senator," he said, his tone measured but cutting. "Years to prove that your loyalty is to the American people. But instead, you chose to sit in the shadow of a man whose every word weakens this nation. That is not loyalty, that is surrender." The crowd murmured, some gasping, others nodding, as the camera zoomed in on Kennedy's tightening jaw. "You think hiding behind Trump gives you strength?" Denzel continued, stepping closer, his voice rising like a wave. "All it gives you is borrowed time. And let me remind you, borrowed time always runs out. Tonight, you're not fooling anyone. America can see you. They can see who you serve. And it isn't them." Kennedy fumbled with his notes, his hands visibly shaking. That's just rhetoric," he muttered weakly, but the words fell flat, swallowed by the weight of the audience's reaction. Denzel paused, letting the silence return, then delivered his final strike with surgical precision. "When the history books are written, your name won't stand beside patriots. It will be a footnote under betrayal." The audience erupted, cheers, whistles, and shouts filling the studio, their voices colliding into one overwhelming roar. Hashtags like hashtag footnote Kennedy and hashtag betrayal exposed began trending within minutes. Kennedy sat back in his chair, face pale, eyes darting, the once confident senator now cornered in front of the entire nation. Meanwhile, Denzel stood unshaken, his presence dominating the room, his words reverberating like the toll of a bell. This wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a reckoning, and Kennedy was on the wrong side of it. Outside the studio, the clash had already ignited a firestorm. News tickers lit up across every major network. Denzel exposes Kennedy live, flashed beneath anchors' stunned faces. Clips of the exchange were instantly uploaded, dissected, and replayed on every platform imaginable. Within an hour, the confrontation had become the #1 trending topic nationwide. On Twitter, users didn't hold back. Kennedy's silence was louder than any confession, one post read, amassing hundreds of thousands of likes. Another simply said, "Denzel said what we've all been thinking." #Kennedy. The hashtag was everywhere, on screens in Times Square, echoed by celebrities, and chanted by protesters outside Capitol Hill. The streets buzzed with the electricity of the moment. College students gathered in campus plazas, replaying the clip on their phones, erupting into cheers when Denzel's words landed like thunder. Outside bars and cafes, people leaned over screens, shaking their heads at Kennedy's stammering and applauding Denzel's composure. Meanwhile, journalists scrambled to capture the fallout. Some labeled it the most damning live call-out in recent political memory. Others said it marked a turning point. No longer was Kennedy merely seen as a senator with questionable loyalties, he was now branded, in the public eye, as the man who folded under Denzel's truth. Inside the studio, even producers could feel it. The control room was flooded with phone calls from networks begging for replay rights, while commentators scrambled to book Denzel for follow-up interviews. And Kennedy? His team released a hurried statement calling Denzel's remarks unfounded and theatrical. But the damage was done. The more they tried to patch the wound, the deeper the gash seemed to grow. Denzel, on the other hand, walked out calmly, his posture firm, his expression steady. He didn't need to chase the headlines were already chasing him. His words weren't just an attack, they had become a rallying cry. In that moment, the battle wasn't just between two men. It had spilled into the streets, the feeds, the living rooms of America. And one truth was clear, Denzel had taken control of the narrative, and Kennedy was left scrambling in its shadow. The echo of Denzel's words didn't stop at the studio door. By the next morning, Washington was buzzing. Senators whispered in corridors, lobbyists sent frantic texts, and Kennedy himself avoided reporters like a man dodging landmines. What rattled them most wasn't just Denzel's bluntness, it was how the public had swallowed it whole, chanting it back as if it were scripture. In committee rooms, the tension was palpable. Colleagues who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Kennedy now eyed him warily, calculating how much his damaged image might drag them down too. Some muttered that he had become a liability. Others, privately, admitted that Denzel had said what many in the chamber had long thought but never dared to voice. Trump, watching from Mar-a-Lago, was furious. Sources whispered he threw a stack of papers across the room, grumbling that Denzel had stolen the spotlight and humiliated his guy. For Trump, this wasn't just about Kennedy, it was about loyalty, image, and control. And Denzel had shattered the illusion of both. In think tanks and political war rooms, strategists debated how to contain the fire. Could Kennedy be rebranded as a misunderstood patriot? Could they spin Denzel's attack as Hollywood theatrics? Every attempt sounded weaker than the last. The truth was obvious, the narrative had slipped out of their hands. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens, veterans, union workers, young activists, felt electrified. They weren't just watching a spat between a senator and an actor. They saw it as a moment of moral clarity, where truth sliced through layers of spin. People began showing up to rallies holding posters with Denzel's words. It wasn't just criticism anymore, it was a movement. For Kennedy, the halls of the Senate felt colder than ever. He sat through a hearing as colleagues deliberately avoided eye contact, their silence louder than any rebuke. Each tap of the gavel reminded him of the line he had crossed, the trust he had traded, and the fact that no statement could undo the image of him, frozen, as Denzel delivered the blow on live television. And for Denzel, the impact was clear, his voice had crossed from performance into politics, from a man calling out corruption to a figure shaping the national conscience. Washington wasn't just listening, it was trembling. Kennedy finally broke his silence. Sitting at a press conference, sweat collecting at his brow, he leaned into the microphone with a strained smile. "Look," he said, voice wobbling between defensiveness and forced calm, "I've always served my constituents. I've always acted in the best interest of America. I won't let a Hollywood actor tell me otherwise." His aides clapped unconvincingly, their applause echoing awkwardly in the half-empty room. But the damage was already visible. Reporters fired back, pressing him on specific deals, names, and lobbyists. Each time he ducked, his words tangled tighter around him. The more he insisted on his innocence, the more the cameras captured his unease. It wasn't the confident senator people remembered, it was a man cornered. Then came Denzel's rebuttal, broadcast live only hours later. Standing firm under the studio lights, he didn't waste time on theatrics. He looked directly into the camera, his tone sharp but measured. "Senator Kennedy wants you to believe he serves America. But the only America he serves," Denzel paused, letting the silence burn, "is the one signed on Trump's checks." The studio gasped. The clip spread like wildfire online. Within minutes, hashtags linked Kennedy's name with betrayal, corruption, and Trump's shadow. Political analysts replayed Denzel's line on loop, calling it the soundbite of the year. Kennedy's counterattack had collapsed before it even began. Instead of reclaiming authority, he confirmed what Denzel accused him of, being defensive, weak, and desperate. In political circles, it was called a self-inflicted wound. On the streets, it was called proof. Trump's reaction was even more telling. Reports leaked that he had called Kennedy, yelling about how pathetic his performance looked. For Trump, loyalty meant strength, and Kennedy had shown neither. Once again, Denzel had not only exposed the cracks but widened them in front of the entire nation. What America saw that week wasn't just a senator scrambling. They saw a cultural moment, where a man of power tried to hide behind politics, and an actor-turned-truth-teller stripped it all away in a single devastating line. The final moment came not in a studio, not in Congress, but on a stage filled with everyday Americans, teachers, veterans, small business owners. Denzel stepped up to the podium, the crowd holding its breath, waiting for the words that had become a rallying cry. His voice was calm but carried the weight of fire. "This isn't about Hollywood versus Washington. This isn't about me versus a senator. This is about truth versus corruption. And I'll tell you something America already knows: if you serve Trump before you serve this nation, you are betraying every single citizen who trusted you with power." The crowd erupted. People rose to their feet, chants filling the hall. Cameras zoomed in on faces, some angry, some tearful, but all united. For once, the noise of politics was drowned out by the raw energy of citizens who felt they had finally heard someone say aloud what had been festering in their hearts. Kennedy's name had already been dragged through the mud, but this was different. This was a cultural turning point. The hashtags from earlier in the week now had a clear headline: #TruthOverPuppets. Analysts across networks replayed Denzel's speech, acknowledging that what had started as a political spat had transformed into a larger question: who really serves the people, and who hides behind Trump's shadow? By the time Denzel stepped back, the message was complete. He didn't have to shout or point fingers. The contrast between dignity and desperation had already spoken louder than anything else. The senator's silence that followed only underlined the truth. For millions watching, this wasn't just entertainment, it was a revelation. America had witnessed the unmasking of a man who sold loyalty cheap, and the rise of a voice reminding them that the people, not the politicians, hold the final word. Tonight wasn't just about exposing one man, it was about reminding America who really holds the power. Corruption can't stand when the truth is spoken. And no matter how loud the lies get, remember this: the people's voice will always be louder.